Hi, this is the last video on prosthetic tools. Today we will explore Mist Raven, Finger Whistle, and Divine Abduction. If you've missed the previous videos, I'll link them in the description, and there is also a playlist titled The World of Sekiro with all the research done so far. As usual, we'll quickly go over the disclaimers, legend, and sources. If it's not the first time around, feel free to skip ahead. Number 1, use common sense. Please do not assume that I have access to some secret true knowledge. I'm just entertained by reading Sekiro in Japanese. My law theories are just theories, so treat them accordingly. Number 2, I am not a professional translator. I have never worked in localization. Yes, I will say that something is translated poorly and something is not, and it will be my personal point of view. Ultimately, my goal is to give you the information so you can see if the localization was good or not, whether something important was lost or not. My opinion is just that, and I choose to share it. As usual, the transcriptions I give do not follow all academic rules, and I don't think it's necessary. They're just here to represent the pronunciation in case you're curious. All sources I used for this research will be listed in the description box below, along with all the additional information that I referenced throughout the video, so you can read more if you're interested. There you will also find a link to my original blog post if you want to read it through. You can learn about Mist Raven's feathers from the 3-story Pagoda memo that you can purchase from Fujioka the info broker. The localization is pretty accurate, only the last line is a little bit different than the original. It says that they are keeping the mist in the pagoda, not that the treasure's name is Blessed Mist. Whether true or not, they are keeping the mist in the pagoda. I remember when I found the pagoda for the first time and there was that Masanaga in his purple cape. I decided that I wanted nothing to do with him, and I just stole the feathers using the iframes you get when opening doors. Then I baited him into the pagoda, ran out from the other side, and jumped into the river. Ah, my younger shinobi days. We have already discussed Mist Raven's feathers when we were talking about Owl and his associated items. To quickly recap, its original name is Kirigarasu no Hane, Mist Raven's feathers. This item describes birds of prey whose true form cannot be captured or caught, that dwell in the mysterious Usui forest where Lady Butterfly spent her younger years and where most likely Owl comes from. His spirit owl might be one of these birds of prey along with the Mist Raven. Its original name is just Kirigarasu, Mist Raven. The localization says that this prosthetic tool is loaded with a feather when we know that the material itself is a bunch of feathers, not one specific feather, so that's kind of weird. The localization also missed the word instantly when describing the effect of the tool, instantly disappear or vanish. The last line reiterates the same idea that is present in the description of Mist Raven's feathers. When you think you've caught it, the only thing left is the feathers. This is Mist Raven. I was sure that in Japanese this upgrade has some other name, but the localization is actually on point. Oibane no Kirigarasu, Mist Raven with the aged feathers. Took me a while to understand how exactly the feathers are upgraded in this prosthetic tool. The original says incisions are made at the tips of the feathers. The line about instant vanishing is identical to that of the previous upgrade. Mist Raven upgrades move us up the ladder of Mist Ravens. There is common Mist Raven, and there is also old Mist Raven that we're mimicking with this upgrade. The localization is accurate. Incisions at the tips of the feathers make it easier to dissolve into mist, just like the old Mist Raven. Well, this is interesting. Nushibane no Kirigarasu, Nushi Feather Mist Raven. Honestly, there is so much stuff about various kinds of Nushi in the original descriptions that the localization probably should have introduced Nushi as a term, much like Shinobi. Just kidding though. As you might remember, Nushi means God of the Land. We discussed it when we were exploring the Great Serpent, who is also a Nushi. Mist Raven with scarlet feathers mixed in. The next paragraph is identical to that of the aged feather Mist Raven. The localization says disappear and displace instead of the previously translated disappear and move away, but we already talked about these slight discrepancies between the localizations of the prosthetic upgrades. So who are we mimicking this time, I wonder? Imitating the Mist Raven Nushi, the feathers are dyed red. Nushi is a god of the land. If touched by a god, there will be consequences. Tada desu manu in general means that something will have consequences and will not be over, the state of things changes. I think it fits pretty well here, along with all the sinister implications that always accompany messing with Nushi. I wondered whether there is one Mist Raven or many of them, and I think these descriptions give a pretty definitive answer. Usui Forest is home to many mysterious birds of prey, including mist ravens and spirit owls. However, it is also home to Nushi, gods of the land, and one of them is Nushi Mist Raven. I find it fascinating that the power of Nushi Mist Raven is that of fire, because Owl's spirit owl that he summons in Foster Father boss fight also has a fire attack. Maybe much like we can use the fire power of Nushi Mist Raven, Owl can harness the power of Nushi Spirit Owl. Let's see how it works. There are two ropes, one of them fastens the bundle of feathers to one of Wolf's fingers, and the other one hooks onto the prosthetic. The little note says that the blades of all the feathers and their ends have their own specific direction. It then goes on to elaborate that each feather's tip stretches along the direction the feather is fixed. We discussed Slender Finger previously as Demon of Hatred's associated item. Its original name is Hosoyubi, literally thin or slender finger. It belongs to a young woman, and I use this item as my proof that whoever thrusted the sword into the Guardian Ape wasn't Kingfisher, because since her finger fits into Wolf's hand, she was a normal-sized human being. I still think it was Owl, but anyway. With this finger, you gain access to a special shinobi technique, Whistle, Yubibue. Since the finger is actually a prosthetic finger, possibly Kingfisher also lost her arm that was replaced by a prosthetic. I guess this finger being a prosthetic also explains why it was still partially intact and not digested completely by the ape. Its original name, as expected, is Yubibue, Whistle, the shinobi technique described in Slender Finger. The original uses the word obikiyoseru to lure someone when describing the effect of the whistle. Otherwise, the localization is pretty accurate, although this prosthetic tool doesn't really enrage beast-type enemies but drives them insane, and those driven insane attack both friend and foe without distinction. Its original name is Yamabiko, which means echo, especially one reverberating in the mountains. The original description doesn't really say in what way this version of the finger whistle is enhanced, it just says a whistle that can sound like a mountain echo. The next paragraph is identical to that of the finger whistle, and the last one is localized accurately. Malcontent's ring is a special upgrade material required for Malcontent, the last upgrade for the finger whistle. Its original name is Nakimushi no Yubiwa. Nakimushi usually denotes a person who is very sensitive and cries easily, and often without good reason, especially a child. I think English crybaby conveys a similar concept. However, if you listen to Sculptor's dialogue when Wolf gives him the monkey booze, you'll notice that the word Nakimushi there is related to the whistle and not to the person who is whistling. I listened to her Nakimushi whistling. Nakimushi? There was a weird ring. And then he tells Wolf about this weird ring that when whistled through would create a sad tune filling the valley. So I think here Nakimushi is a quality of the tune, solitude and beauty, and by extension the name of the ring required to produce it. As for the English name Malcontent, I am so mesmerized by the sound of this word that my judgment is clouded. I love the word Malcontent. It's not really close to what Nakimushi stands for, but I can't think of a localization that would be accurate, so Malcontent it is. Interesting that this ring is specified as old, and yet the Slender Finger was specified as belonging to a young woman. Maybe this ring was passed down to her, or maybe she just found it somewhere. The engraving on the underside says Kawasemi, Kingfisher. Incredible, but the next line of the description quotes the sculptor's monkey boost dialogue exactly. And this is how you're meant to understand that this is the very ring he told you about. The last line honestly breaks my heart. The cry is so lonesome and beautiful, enough to forget the burning hatred, just for a while. When you read Sekiro slowly as I do and take note of words that are somehow specific to a character or a phenomenon, you'll start noticing that many things in the narrative have their own vocabulary, and every word choice is very much intentional. Moeru ensa, burning hatred, the words that we've seen many times in basically everything that pertains to Sculptor battling the building flames and to the demon of hatred. It is unfortunate that much of this nuance was lost in the localized version of the description. This is a significant ring that Sculptor tells you about, and this description is about him specifically, not just about some rather generic voice of rage. Nakimushi. If you look closely at the picture, you'll see Malcontent's ring on the finger just below the blowing holes. The original description states that Malcontent can cause anguish in apparition-type enemies, thus creating a weak spot or a window of opportunity. This last line was not localized into the English version, probably due to the lack of space. The last paragraph, I feel, can refer both to the kingfisher and kingfisher birds that are typically found along the waterfront and lay eggs on riverbanks. Kingfisher's cry could be heard along the waterfront of the sunken valley. Not anymore. I think there is more sadness in this line, not because Kingfisher is dead, that much we knew already, but because it tells us about earlier, happier times when kingfisher birds cried along the waterfront, and orangutan and his partner were training in the valley, and she was whistling through Malcontent's ring, filling the valley with a lonesome but beautiful tune. Those times are long gone now. Kingfisher is dead, and there is nothing to make orangutan forget the burning hatred, even for a short while. Classic Sekiro descriptions that make you feel sad on multiple levels. Let's see how the finger whistle works. As you can see, the finger whistle acts as a double for Prosthetic's middle finger and is attached to the same joint. From what I can tell, Wolf is able to rotate the joint and thus choose the finger that he needs. You know what? Finger whistle doesn't look like a massive or elaborate contraption. You could attach anything else on top of it. A shuriken wheel, the firecracker, Sabimaru, or Iron Fortress, literally anything, and they won't interfere with each other. Its original name is pretty straightforward, Daiuchiwa, large fan. Funny, but the localization says dyed red when the original uses turned red like foliage in autumn. Japanese Aurelia doesn't turn red in autumn though, it is an evergreen shrub, so the localization chose to write dyed red. Otherwise, it is correct. This is a leaf of Japanese Aurelia. Its Japanese name is Yatsude. It consists of 8 and hand, and that's why it is often translated as hand of 8 or 8 fingers. Interestingly enough, it is apparently not the intended meaning at all, since Aurelia leaves never have 8 fingers, they always have either a 7 or 9, and thus are considered bringers of good luck, since odd numbers in many Asian cultures are believed to be lucky numbers, because they can be split. As I learned from a blog post written by a person living in Japan, apparently the 8 kanji here doesn't convey the number itself, but rather lends the word the meaning expansive or infinite that is derived from the very form of the kanji, 2 lines widening at each side. I'll leave a link to the blog post in the description box below. Let's unpack the whole spiriting away thing. I think to spirit away became a somewhat standard translation of kamikakushi when a legendary animated film by Hayao Miyazaki was released in 2001, titled Sen to Chihiro no Kamikakushi, localized into English as Spirited Away. I distinctly remember being impressed by it many years ago, and I still am. Kamikakushi consists of kami, god, and kakushi, a derivative of kakusu, which means to conceal or to hide. Kamikakushi can literally be translated as abduction by gods or hidden by gods. In Japanese, it is a noun. Surprisingly, some dictionaries assign a negative connotation to it, like taken by an angered god, but in fact it's quite neutral. Kamikakushi was used in the ancient times when someone suddenly has gone missing without any warning or apparent reason, especially when a person went to a mountain and never came back or disappeared in the woods, as those places usually house gods. To my surprise, a Japanese source I read on the matter says that apparently kamikakushi is used even now, albeit rarely, when someone disappears without a trace. There's also a synonym for this word, tengukakushi, abduction by tengu. The localization quite creatively uses both to spirit away and divine abduction as translations for kamikakushi, depending on sentence structure. The next part is kind of confusing. The original doesn't use any pronouns as usual, however, it uses a specific verb form to indicate call to action, similar to the English let's. If abducted by gods, let's head to Mount Kongo. On Mount Kongo in Sempo Temple, we will make merit or perform virtual deeds. At this stage, it is not really clear who came up with this instruction and for what reason, but I hope the next prosthetic upgrades will shed some light on this. Divine Abduction's original name is, as one would expect, kamikakushi. The Japanese description says that it is a small divine abduction from which one can return immediately, which is kinda cute. Otherwise, it reiterates the same idea from the large fan. If someone who already has been abducted by gods gets abducted again, there is no coming back. Weird, but this prosthetic tool is called exactly this, ni kamikakushi, double divine abduction. Sounded kind of out of place for me, but that's the original name. The localization says that it is a large fan that creates a vortex of wind, but that's not exactly new. The prosthetic tool is called Large Fan, and all modifications create a vortex of wind. The original says that the main difference is in the size of the vortex, a large fan that creates a massive vortex of wind. Otherwise, the description is exactly the same as that of Divine Abduction, except for the part explaining that you can wave it twice in succession. Well, Golden Vortex is called very differently in Japanese, but there was no way to localize it accurately. So it's called Gokishin Mawashi, where Gokishin means contribution or donation to a temple accompanied by an honorific prefix, and Mawashi can be translated as a turn. The main feature of this prosthetic upgrade is that enemies drop their possessions, including money, when turned away, and this is exactly the donation referenced in the name of the upgrade. So Golden Vortex is literally a temple donation turn, which I think is hilarious. The last line of the description is just as funny. Those turned around drop the items and money in their possession. Those are the temple donations. Thank you. Aurelia plants are not only considered lucky, but they're also believed to attract wealth and money because the leaves look like gigantic hands. That's why they're often planted along the pathways and house entrances. As you can see, the choice of plant for this prosthetic tool is not random at all. Curious that when you abduct Senpo monks themselves with Golden Vortex, they straight up vanish. Probably it's meant to be a retribution for breaking many taboos and accumulating wealth to fund their research. Let's look at the art book. Here you can see all modifications listed in a row, a regular Divine Abduction, then Divine Abduction with a wind gathering reinforcement, and finally the Golden Vortex with a stealing reinforcement. There you can also see how this tool is attached to the prosthetic with a rope and a metal loop, as well as how two metal handles attach to one another to create double Divine Abduction and Golden Vortex, which are essentially just two Divine Abduction fans placed on top of one another and spread wide to make a larger fan capable of creating a larger vortex of wind. So what was it used for? In his dialogue, Kotaro says, "The monks told me that shinobi can perform kamikakushi. Thus we can conclude that temple shinobi were probably using such fans with kachin sugars to spirit away children. The children then followed some kind of legend mentioned in the description of the large fan. If abducted, seek Senpo Temple on Mount Kongo to perform virtual deeds. So the abducted kids end up on Mount Kongo after being spirited away and are then experimented on. However, when we spirit away Kotaro, who was the caretaker of the Children of Rejuvenation, he ends up in the Halls of Illusion, a place closest to Buddha and also a place that monks cannot reach anymore because they strayed so far away from the ways of Buddha. Why would that be the case? My theory is that Kotaro was already abducted once, probably as a child, just like everyone else. Then he ended up on Mount Kongo, but for some reason was not experimented on, but instead appointed caretaker of all the other kids. And when we spirit him away, it's his second time. One can only return from being spirited away once, and if taken again, there is no coming back. There is also his father's note in the abandoned dungeon. Apparently he tried to reach Fountainhead Palace, but I'm not sure where it fits right now. We'll get to it later. But why would Divine Abduction be located in the Sunken Valley, which is, unsurprisingly, quite in the opposite direction of Mount Kongo? We find it at the foot of the White Serpent Bodhisattva, the one identical to that in the Serpent Shrine where we find dried serpent viscera. Maybe it was enshrined there after the monks stopped kidnapping children. The monk you meet in the main hall did seem quite sorrowful of what they'd done, so maybe he or someone else hid the Divine Abduction fan deep in the Sunken Valley and protected it with a long-armed centipede. And we're done with prosthetic tools. I feel like now I know a whole lot more than I did before, but there are more discoveries ahead. In the next videos, we'll talk about upgrade materials and prosthetic combat arts. Also, why do we need spirit emblems to use the prosthetic? Don't forget to check the description for relevant links and more reading. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.